3:04. So with that in mind, I'm gonna get us going a little bit. And I'm so glad you all are here. Um, and that we can make this kind of restart together or kind of jump into the new year a little bit early with the Campaign for Work in Connecticut, which is a coalition in United Way is so proud to be part of. Can somebody tell me the screen share works?
Looks good.
Thanks. Thanks,
Yes.
friends. And I'm going to just throw some spotlights up. We're just in a meeting, so feel free to use the chat if you have questions or ideas. Feel free to share those anytime throughout the conversation. You can have your camera on, you can have your camera off. Um, we're going to keep it informal this afternoon, but we're going to talk about some really important stuff, which is that our workforce is at a crossroads and um, very straightforward agenda. Feel free to keep introducing yourself in the chat, but we're really grateful to have Yasmin, our great colleague from the National Skills Coalition, with us to talk about the federal issues that have been changing at a very rapid pace and how that impacts us here in Connecticut, as well as what other states have been doing to respond to that, what other coalitions like the Campaign for Work in Connecticut have been doing to respond to that, to get us motivated for 2026. And we've begun to make our plan for 2026 as a coalition, and really grateful to have such a great turnout today so that we could start to build that together. And I'm going to just shout out these amazing co-chairs and start to hand the microphones over to them. Starting in the middle with my colleague at United Way of Connecticut, Amy Casavina Hall, who actually last minute couldn't join us today, but who is going to be part of this, leadership in this coalition. Kristen, you want to give a wave? Kristen Hempel from EastCon jumping into the mix this year as well. And I'm going to pass the mic over to you proverbially, Jim, if that's okay, to kind of introduce the coalition and introduce Yasmin, but Jim Boucher from Capital Workforce Partners has been a part of this coalition for a number of years. So Jim, take it away from here.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. And again, hello to everyone. When you were talking about, holiday favorites or winter favorites, Daniel, I must admit, all of a sudden the assortment of chocolates come alive real well around this time of the year. So got some by me if I wish I could share more right now. But again, my name is Jim Boucher, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Capital Workforce Partners, one of Connecticut's 5 workforce development boards serving North Central Connecticut. And as Daniel mentioned, I'm one of the members of the leadership team for the Campaign for Work in Connecticut, along with Amy, Kristen, and as Daniel and Cheryl and others have been leading this effort. For those of you who might be newer to this space, the Campaign for Working Connecticut is a statewide coalition that's been around for about 25 years almost. And we work to bring together workforce and education, community leaders, nonprofits, labor, public-private leaders, business leaders, philanthropy around a shared goal, which is to build a stronger, more equitable workforce and economy for Connecticut. And I want to pause on that word together because today we will be talking about the Connecticut workforce at a crossroad. And we have seen some significant gains in recent years in terms of some of the Connecticut workforce development outcomes. And those workforce gains didn't happen by accident. It took really a lot of hard work by many of you who are here today, who've worked hard to support the gains that are literally impacting thousands of Connecticut residents and businesses to gain economic self-sufficiency and develop a quality workforce. And this happened because of coalition building and because of intentional public investment, flexible funding, and advocacy. And again, that included many of you that are here with us today: workforce boards, adult education providers, community organizations, employers, and other advocates that have been so supportive, and a lot of public legislative leaders, governors, Workforce Council, Office of Workforce Strategy, Department of Labor, a number of state departments, workforce development boards have been also critical, along with the United Way and a number of initiatives and, again, philanthropy. But here's where we are at today. Why today matters so much. The gains that we've all worked so hard at in terms of workforce development. We are concerned that Connecticut is at a crossroads as federal workforce employment training and education funds decline. The impacts are no longer abstract. They're showing up in real time in terms of what individuals and families and communities are experiencing in terms of gaining these kinds of important employment training resources. And let me just ask you to reflect for a moment, and no need to actually raise your hand, but just think about this. How many of you have already felt the effects of recent federal funding reductions or policy shifts, either in your own programs or in the systems you work with every day, or to other people that you know who are close by to you? My guess is that many of you have had these experiences, and those impacts, not only are they impacting programs, but most importantly, and ultimately, most importantly, individuals and residents who are already navigating barriers and uncertainty into the most vulnerable communities who are fully impacted. And that's why this moment today demands more than concern, it demands action. And as federal dollars recede, state level leadership and investment becomes absolutely critical. Without it, we risk erosion of the very systems that help people move into good jobs and economic self-sufficiency, and that Connecticut's employers rely on to meet workforce demand. In the months ahead, the Campaign for Working Connecticut will be focused on policy and advocacy that protects and strengthens key investments, things like skills training, opportunity youth programs, adult education, child tax credits, career pathways, employer-centered workforce strategies, and a lot of the activities that we have seen around the Alice report that need attention. And we will need all of you working closely together. We will be giving more details a little bit later in this meeting about what's upcoming. This will require all of us, state agencies, legislators, workforce development and education leaders, community organizations and advocates and philanthropy, pulling together with urgency and clarity. And this brings us today to today's discussion and why we're so fortunate to be joined by our main presenter. I'm very pleased to introduce Yasmin Falakir, who will help ground us in the federal landscape shaping this moment. Yasmin is the Senior State Network Manager at the National Skills Coalition, where she supports state-level coalitions across the country, bringing together workforce boards, education partners, employers, advocates, and policymakers to advance inclusive skills and workforce policy. Yasmin has led cross-sector strategy, technical assistance, and advocacy efforts focused on strengthening career pathways and expanding economic mobility nationwide. She's also deeply engaged in SkillSpan, the National Skills Coalition's national network of state coalitions, of which the Campaign for Working Connecticut is proud to be part of. And at this moment, when Connecticut's workforce system is at a true inflection point, Yasmin will share how other states are responding and what opportunities are in front of us if we choose to act boldly. Yasmin, thank you for being with us today. We are really looking forward to the conversation with you, and also I highly encourage all of us to listen to what this means for Connecticut. Yasmin, to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Excited to be here to share this space with you all. And I'll quickly introduce myself, Yasmin, with National Skills Coalition. I'm going to spend a majority of today really grounding us all in what's happening at the federal level, what's happened over the last year, and what's continuing to take place. I then want to talk about what this means for the work of the Campaign for Working Coalition, Campaign for Working Connecticut Coalition, and how you can position yourselves for successful advocacy in the coming year. And then lastly, I will share examples of efforts being led by other skillspan coalitions that could serve as inspiration for you all. The value of being in NSC's network, whether that be through Skillspan or as a partner who just follows our work more generally, it's the connection with like-minded advocates and practitioners and leaders across the country, right? So collectively, we are advancing a movement that aims to guarantee access to training and education for all so that we can continue to strengthen the outcomes of workers, families, and communities. And so my goal is that you will leave this presentation feeling a part of the NSC network and with access to experts and advocates across the country who are pushing for the same thing. Okay, and then one more, please. So jumping into federal updates, let's all just get grounded on where we're at right now. Currently, appropriations are top of mind for federal lawmakers. So in November, following the largest government shutdown in history, Congress passed a continuing resolution to fund the government through January 30th. However, Congress still needs to pass its annual federal budget to actually keep all parts of the government functioning beyond January 30th. And so there are 12 appropriations bills total that need to be finalized. One of the bills that they are still negotiating is the Labor, HHS, and Ed bill, which funds several priorities that this group cares about, including WIOA, right? So our government affairs team is following congressional activity closely. We are engaging federal leaders in advocacy to push them to pass this bill to finalize full year funding for programs under these agencies. We all know how disruptive it is when funding is cut or rescinded or paused, and so we're really trying to avoid that from happening. If you are interested, NSC has a sign-on letter that you can contribute your organization's name to. We'll include it in the chat and in a follow-up email, but no pressure at all. Okay, next slide. So working our way back a bit, we wouldn't be able to talk about federal activity this year without getting into HR 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so as a reminder, this law was passed by Congress in July, and it really has just serious, serious implications for states, for workers, and the systems that support them. Significant funding cuts and expanded work requirements for critical safety net programs like SNAP and Medicaid. And I know you all probably know this already, but really the things that we're seeing as a result of this bill specifically, that individuals that are pursuing training and education and employment are now going to face stricter access to limited benefits that are really critical to ensuring their well-being and that of their families. And we all in this work know that the burden of this new reality is going to disproportionately fall on low-income workers and job seekers. We also know a result is going to be that for most states, maybe not Connecticut, but for most states, their own budgets are going to meet a lot greater strain. It's going to prompt lawmakers and leaders to make stricter funding decisions. And these threats generally are being met by most states also with a cooling economy and what we know are the expirations of federal investments from before, like ARPA. So overall, there's just really this strengthened narrative against people who are pursuing education, training, and employment. The law tells working people that they should train for in-demand jobs, but essentially strips access to the supports that they need to do so successfully. And we know, we can probably guess in which states some of these lawmakers are going to build on that narrative and further absolve states of their responsibility to provide access to systems that actually support economic mobility. Next slide, please. So to that point, we are seeing states respond in one of three ways. First, active policy making and investments to ensure that federal funding cuts and work requirements tied to basic needs have minimal impact on residents. A couple of states that come to mind here are New Mexico and Maryland. Their governors and lawmakers have made it very clear that they are feeling like they are the protectors to the people from the threats of the federal administration. These are the states that are really looking most earnestly to raise revenue through targeted taxes and fees and to meet their responsibilities to fill in budget gaps for programs that are important for economic opportunity. The second group is where most states are honestly going to fall. It's the hard debates on trade-offs and priorities with an approach to fill gaps in the budget by reallocating state investments and also making cuts. A lot of states will fall here because this is the more moderate or politically mixed approach. It frees up existing funds rather than looking to revenue-raising strategies. And then finally, the third group, there are going to be the states that support cuts and restrictions and are continuing to make intentional decisions to double down on these provisions, right? These are the states most interested in closing the door to safety net programs entirely, which is within their discretion from HR 1. They're going to look to impose harsher work requirements and really build on this narrative to make additional cuts in the name of efficiency. Now, Connecticut is incredibly unique given your surplus of funds available to lawmakers. I know Dan and Kristen are going to talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but I encourage you to consider how leaders in your state are aligning themselves within one of these three frames and whether that's what's required of them or if it's a political choice that we need to push back on. Next slide, please. All right, so what power do you have as advocates? As we say, that's a choice and you can push back on it. What should you be doing to direct this state? Next slide. So, with so many variables at play, state advocates have to act quickly and strategically. Advocates have to look at both offensive and defensive strategies, thinking about short-term wins to protect what's working now, while also fighting for these long-term systems changes that we know are necessary. Again, in a few minutes, you guys are going to dive deeper into the Connecticut landscape specifically and the opportunities available for advocacy. But before then, I really want to emphasize a point that NSC has continued to beat the drum on publicly, behind the scenes with our partners, as I'm in conversations with all of your leads, and then also internally as we develop our own agenda for the coming year. We keep coming back to this idea of one fight, right? What we see is that the dismantling of workforce, education, healthcare, safety net systems, these things aren't siloed. The same way people's lives don't exist in silos, neither do these systems. And when a threat comes for one system, it's coming for them all. Because we know this is more than just a threat to the system, it's a threat to the people and the families who it serves. And, NSC is a policy advocacy organization that's focused on workforce development, but we humbly recognize that our movement won't advance without the mobilization of advocates from other sectors, right? So this is my call to action for the Campaign for Working Connecticut. Come together, regardless of the sector or the system that you are in. Think about what is best for the people of your state. Think about workforce needs, healthcare needs, basic needs that are required for their well-being. These systems, these factors, they're all interconnected, right? And if we as a coalition are serious about strengthening the outcomes of families and communities, we really have to work together. We need to push back on the threats to our systems by building shared power, right? And so let's be strategic about the policies and the investments that we're asking leaders for. Let's demonstrate how our asks can lead to broader impacts that they're interested in, right? One thing that has been top of mind for me this year that I've been telling a lot of our partners is to avoid leaning into the scarcity threats that are often put on advocates in these kinds of environments, right? I actually encourage folks to alternatively think about the curb cut effect, right? And so for those who don't know, the curb cut is the name of the part of the sidewalk that levels down to the street to allow for easier access than the steps. And this was originally created to support greater access to sidewalks for those with disabilities, right? But it eventually became a very vital tool for a lot of others to benefit from, like caretakers with strollers or kids with scooters, or honestly, just like the person who doesn't want to have to take the step. And so I like to think of our theory of action at NSC for collective advocacy. It's directed by that same principle, right? Like, how can we push back on the scarcity threats from lawmakers and instead pursue workforce policies and investments that have curb cut effects? We know that when people have access to high quality workforce training, they get better access to high quality jobs, higher wages, other necessary quality of life contributors like healthcare and childcare. And we know that lawmakers have the economy top of mind. We're seeing both sides of the aisle fighting to be the party of the working people, to make that case that they have and are willing to prioritize the needs of workers and families, regardless of whether their actions actually reflect that or not. And NSC sees that in the coming years, workforce policy is going to be a very strong vehicle to advance the priority of other sectors. And if we do this right, meaning that we do it led by experts on the ground and advocates like yourselves, then it can lead to the legitimate strengthening of all of these systems together. So again, my call to action for you, pursue this one fight together. But what does that actually look like and require? So Here are a few roles that we see state advocates playing in pursuit of this vision. And the first should be familiar, right? Organize and mobilize cross-sector partners, build bridges by raising awareness on the collective interests on the issues facing workers, families, and the systems that serve them. The second is engaging, educating, and advocating key leaders on these decisions that they can make to reduce harm to workers and families and strengthen economic prosperity. Again, thinking about an offensive defensive ask, advocates need to educate lawmakers on the power that they hold to protect residents in Connecticut from the instability of the federal administration in DC. And we also need to hold state lawmakers responsible for providing steadiness and support in the absence of federal leadership, right? The third one and last bucket is defending, protecting, and preserving existing state investments and case making the value of additional levers. So really the goal here is just to ensure that nothing is left on the table and that your state is leveraging every tool available to reduce the loss of basic needs and to maintain or expand access to quality training and careers. This is a strong place of opportunity for Connecticut if we can play our cards right, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Next slide. So I am charging you all with a lot, but you are not in this work alone. Like I said, NSC is here to be helpful. So first, like I mentioned before, however you engage with NSC, it means that you have access to a network of advocates, practitioners, and leaders from across the country. So please use our network to learn about what's happening in states and at the federal level, the strategies and actions of advocates in other states, their lessons learned, best practices to inform your work, or honestly, to find resonance in doing this work at a time when it's especially draining, right? Feel free to check out our website, read our blogs, follow us on LinkedIn or the email listserv, stay up to date on things. And if you want to learn more or be connected with partners, just reach out. But we are also here to provide the Campaign for Working Connecticut with dedicated support, right? As our SkillSpan Coalition, we can offer things like research and analysis to identify policy models of interest and the most effective vehicles to advance them. We can also consider or explore administrative actions to strengthen outcomes, right? Advocacy is not limited to legislation. And then we can also help identify and map out advocacy strategies, engagement efforts, comms tactics like op-eds, public opinion work. We can provide testimony. Beyond myself, we have some very knowledgeable staff experts on hand who really can go deeper than I can and provide a lot of technical assistance to you all, and can even show up in your state, right? And reinforce the support of your interests from NSC, seen as a credible national organization in this space. Next slide, please. Okay, and now I really would be remiss to not mention our upcoming Skills Summit. The way NSC sees it, state advocates do not need to watch from the sidelines while decisions are being made in DC. Our Skills Summit is an annual event where our entire network comes together to advocate collectively on the Hill. This upcoming one is quickly approaching. It's February 5th and 6th in DC. We have intentionally chosen to have the event earlier this year. Usually it's in May. Because we want to influence lawmakers while they're making these key funding decisions and implementation decisions in the coming fiscal year, right? And so at a time of political and economic uncertainty, this is just another call to action for you if you are interested in getting more involved. And we'll include a link to the registration in the chat. Thank you, Cheryl. All right, so now I want to share a few examples of advocacy efforts from our network that might inspire the work that you're thinking about leading together. And I will note that you're going to see some trends across each of these examples, like the use of data, right? Or organizing across sectors. And that's because these are best practices that I continue to reinforce. And so next slide, please. So the first, and honestly, I could go on about all three of the examples I'm going to share because they're just such good examples, but feel free to ask any questions you have. I'm putting myself on a time limit here. The first example is an advocacy campaign that's actually currently underway by our SkillSpan Coalition in Georgia. And so this group has organized a sub-coalition dedicated specifically to SNAP that they are referring to as Mile Wide and Inch Deep. And I note this distinction because often in the face of scarcity threats or unpredictability, advocates can choose to close in the circle that they work with and focus on core partners that they have established relationships with. Our partners in Georgia have taken a different approach, and they're really opening the table to any stakeholder that has an interest in the safety net or workforce system. So this is what they call inside the Capitol partners, community-based organizations, training providers, others like food banks, employers, labor groups. The coalition's goal is for the state to invest $50 million to fill the federal funding gaps in SNAP. And by doing so, the state will lower its error rate, which will eventually save costs down the road to maintain the program. The group is also using this opportunity to call for strengthening of the employment and training provision within SNAP. For those who don't know, SNAP's not just food assistance, it also includes a workforce development component to provide individuals using this benefit with the opportunity to upskill or gain education and go into employment. So knowing that work requirements are now in place to receive food assistance through SNAP, strengthening employment and training programs are another way to both expand access to training and work and protect access to the food benefit. Our coalition is leading a very impressive advocacy campaign. It includes a wide range of voices reinforcing the economic value of SNAP to the state. I know Cheryl threw in a link to a recent fact sheet that they had published last month with really just great data highlighting the number of jobs, the total wages, the total economic impact SNAP contributes to the state of Georgia. It's really a good model to consider replicating when it comes to educating lawmakers on the benefits of workforce and safety net programs, not just to workers, but also to employers and communities in the states as a whole, right? The group is planning an advocacy day in February during the state's legislative session. They're going to feature testimony, not just from individuals who are using SNAP to receive food assistance, but also industries that benefit economically from it, like the grocers associations. And so, like I said before, this is a group with many different partners at the table. That's what NSC is all about, right? Coalition is in our name. Cross-sector organizing is our theory of action. At the same time, as the saying goes, there can be too many cooks in the kitchen, right? And so that's why we have our dedicated coalition leads, right? In this case, it's Jim, Amy, Kristen, Dan, Cheryl. They're going to steer the group's work and organizing. One strategy that I'd encourage you all to think about is the ladder of engagement approach, right? What does this mean for you all as you think about coalition engagement? There's different tiers to engagement. Maybe you have lots of capacity and interest to lend and want to join every coalition meeting. Maybe you have a great story to support through testimony, or maybe you're best positioned to provide signatures on sign-on letters and to share it with your network. There's no wrong way to be a part of the coalition. All of these things together help build power. And so as the group moves into a discussion of the work you can do today, I just want to encourage you all. I know we're all at capacity and doing as much as we can every day in our roles, but participation in the coalition doesn't look one way. And I know that your leads here are really eager to organize a movement together, and that includes a variety or breadth of engagement. All right, next slide, please. So the second example is from a neighbor of yours. It's a win from the most recent legislative session by our SkillSpan Coalition in Massachusetts. So they actually successfully were able to direct their state to invest $10 million to expand access to vocational ESOL. And so this means that individuals who are participating in job training environments are going to get contextualized English language learning. So typically ESOL is funded and provided through education programs, right? And so this was actually one of the main challenges our coalition had to address, disrupting that turf war that was felt between the education and the workforce sectors and building a bridge between the two that doesn't threaten either's funding, but rather aims to expand the pie as a whole. And so you can see from the data point that I included here that there was a strong economic argument to be made for the state's investment in vocational ESOL. The group conducted several research studies that reinforced that the number of immigrants in the state were unable to participate in the workforce because of language barriers. And the interest by these individuals, as well as employers, were high to address this issue to fill the labor gaps and to support broader economic prosperity in the state. Still, work was required to ensure that education advocates and state leaders understood that the interest of the coalition wasn't to divert funds away from educational ESOL. We were rather trying to make the case that ESOL could be viewed through a workforce lens and that this was really a necessary tool for immigrants also to assimilate, to upskill, to contribute to the state's economy, right? And especially given recent federal threats to immigration, there was a concern by advocates in engaging this population in research and contributing their voice to advocacy efforts. I'll say that they were very mindful in working closely with immigration advocates to ensure that this work was really centered in the needs of these individuals, and that the participation was safe and meaningful. And so I'm really proud of this example within our coalition for a few reasons. First, it's another model for advancing a seemingly non-workforce priority, that being immigration, through a workforce lens. In other words, really making the case effectively on how these two issues intersect and how their collective benefits can be achieved through state support. Second, the group made clear from the beginning that they weren't interested in the state diverting existing ESOL investments from education to workforce, right? They demonstrated using valuable evidence why both forms of learning and investments were necessary for the state to truly support immigrants. And then third, I really like the economic lens again in which they frame this issue. If nothing else, state lawmakers are feeling the pressure to provide a strong economy, right? This is regardless of the actions taken by federal lawmakers. State lawmakers are also looking for an offensive win, something that demonstrates proactive leadership on their part, and not just leadership that's trying to keep up and react to federal threats. And I will say that our coalition in Massachusetts, they use this to their benefit through that framing. Next slide, please. Great. Okay. And so this is my last example, and then I can take questions. So this one is from our Skillspan Coalition in Iowa. I know many of us know and can agree with this. Childcare is not simply an optional benefit that workers and learners could use. It is a true barrier to individuals' engagements in education, training, and honestly, continued employment. And so at NSC, we like to say basic needs are workforce needs. And this is the case with both the SNAP food assistance advocacy in Georgia and also the childcare advocacy that our coalition led in Iowa. And so this group was able to successfully pass legislation that created a gradual phase out from the state's childcare assistance program. So essentially, families were facing a childcare cliff once their wages reached a certain level. The coalition demonstrated how this cliff impacted the employment and retention rates of several industries across the state, and they used models where childcare was provided to gather evidence that access to childcare, in fact, successfully reduced turnover by up to 60%. I mean, you can't argue with that number, truly. And so, in addition to the phase out, the group also successfully increased the childcare provider reimbursement rate to 80% of the market rate value. Higher reimbursement rates allow childcare providers to stay open. It attracts quality staff by providing better wages. And it also means that parents have greater access to quality childcare, including those closer to home and work. And so you'll see again in this example, with the data on the slide, that the economic case for these asks were clear and they were really hard to argue with. And this is just another great example of our Skillspan network framing an issue through a workforce lens, making that economic case to state lawmakers, and engaging a range of stakeholders to collectively advocate. The coalition was really intentional on seeking buy-in and champions from local employers, human resource organizations, C-suite executives to really reinforce this economic need. And they were also able to point to local models where employers worked with CBOs to provide childcare access to workers and use these partnerships as a call for the state to strengthen strategies already working, right? All right, next slide. Okay, that was a lot of information. I'm happy to answer questions. If folks have questions later, something comes up, please email me. Don't be shy. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Dan, Kristen, Amy, Jim, for leading the campaign for Working Connecticut. And also to all of you, right? Not just for listening to me, but for caring about people and families and communities and being willing to work together to change lives for the better. It's really a hard time to be an advocate in these spaces. So I hope you know that NSC is grateful for your work at the local level and that, we really are here to support you, however you see fit.
So hard to clap on Zoom, right? Just not the same as if we were in a room all together. But Yasmin, that was extremely helpful. I feel like somebody just made an amazing clap
Thank you.
on my screen. I mean, you got me all fired up. So, which I knew you would do. But let's just, this is why we wanted to have in this setting where we can kind of circle up for a minute. If there are some questions, would love to hear them if you just want to unmute or raise your hand and ask it. But I'll get started, with the one from Dan. Hi, Dan, and feel free to ask it in your own words, but you put in the chat this kind of question about um, making sure that we're involved in that volunteer requirements as they become online and goals you have around that. I don't know, Yasmin, is there anything you're hearing on that front, as far as the work requirement and volunteer hours that could contribute to that?
Let me read the question.
Or go ahead, Dan. I see you unmuted.
Well, yeah, and apologies, I can't be on video because my camera's not working in my current setup. But yeah, Dan from IVCG, Greater New Haven, and we're helping support coalition. We have I don't know 18 or so organizations in this volunteer engagement group of Greater New Haven, which stemmed from CFAN actually, and has just kind of evolved from there. It's been going on about a year or so. But the focus has been really kind of narrowing and ramping up around the issues of accelerating accessibility for volunteer opportunities, right? The reality is like our focus, for 42 years been on seniors, folks 60 plus, but if you can imagine a 61-year-old who, doesn't have family, doesn't drive, and isn't yet, opting out, right? Or meeting that opt out requirement and doesn't hit the 65 limit, right? She's got to volunteer 20 hours a week, right? 80 hours a month. Like it's pretty bonkers. And the reality is that for most of the folks in that boat, they're not going to meet those volunteer requirements with one organization. It's just not going to work, right? Like the organization, I can say on behalf of ours, we don't have the capacity to facilitate all of the like needs, right, to make that many hours possible. So I really believe, and this is what's emerged from this coalition, is that we really feel and want to bring focus together on this, right? That it's got to happen as a collective, and we got to open those opportunities and make them easier. And for some of our neighbors, it's a tech issue. They might not know how to manage the tech. They're going to need some help, right? So we are really eager to work on that, both in terms of facilitating maybe easier entry point for them, which tech could be a part of, along with the idea of having opportunities for individual one-to-one coaching or small group orientation, right? Helping facilitate our neighbors who need to get through applications and be associated with more than one organization. Right. Taking so often, I'll just land with this. So often, I think organizations fall into the trap of pursuing the world through their own lens, right? Which is totally understandable, but it creates a lot of struggle, right, for the individual who then is trying to involve themselves with community. And while individuals can and often have emotional connection to an organization or many organizations, plural, right? The reality is that for a lot of folks, a lot of neighbors, right, their interest is on service in community above maybe, completing a task for, a specific entity, right? Like they might like us or whatever. But so how do we take away the traditional lens of the organization, put the lens on the individual together so we can make this more possible, push back against these ridiculous requirements?
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is a great example, and I really appreciate your own attitude and self-awareness to try to like take a step back and view the work through the individual and not your own organization. Two things come to mind. So when I hear about your work and I hear about what you're trying to pursue, I try to think about it through the lens of other priorities that NSE has or that our partners advance. So the first thing that I thought about that are broader buckets, right? That you could successfully benefit from, but might not be explicitly named. And so let me give you an example. So when I hear you talk about it might even be something as simple as folks don't have access to a computer or they don't know how to use the technology to get those kinds of opportunities. That makes me think of digital skills, digital equity, right? That's a whole broader priority on its own. And there's a lot of sub priorities within that, right? There's the seniors, there's folks who are specifically under the volunteering groups that you're talking about. There are immigrants, there are students, right? Opportunity youth. And so one idea you could think about is how to add your demographic, your population, to existing digital equity or digital skills building coalitions or campaigns that are taking place. And a part of that cross-sector organizing, right, is like seeing yourself in their work and vice versa, but also negotiating, figuring out a middle ground, right? So like they might not explicitly name the population that you serve when they're talking to a lawmaker, but when it comes down to writing legislation, that could be a kind of organization that's named as a grant, as a organization that could receive a grant to support that kind of work, for example. Another place that I see an opportunity for you to connect with others is through navigators. And so when we talk about navigators at NSC, we've seen them sort of as benefits navigators often, whether that's in a community college or a community-based organization. And they're individuals who receive funding whose jobs are paid for by the state. And they're essentially there to provide support to individuals to find access to benefits that they either know or don't know about, right? It sounds like the opportunities for like supporting your population could be something that these navigators do. And that's an existing role in most states already to some degree. And so you could think about how to advocate for additional funding to further strengthen those roles. And that wouldn't take away from the benefit that that role provides to others, whether it comes to food assistance, transportation, or workforce. I hope that was helpful.
It's all helpful. I mean, look, we got to throw all the spaghetti at the wall in a way. We struggle, I think, with the sort of duality of living in a world of silos, but recognizing our heart, it really beats in the rhythm of cross collaboration, right? Like beyond those silos, the world doesn't actually work in silos, but like we think in silos. And unfortunately, organizationally, right, that's created a lot of struggle. Yeah, it's all good. It's all helpful. We're just trying to figure out how to do more faster together because it's not going to work to try to do this alone.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Anything else spring to mind, or just things even that you wanted to add that were insightful, right? I thought Yasmin, for me, like, talking about where our state is in that continuum of wanting to tighten those restrictions versus wanting to be very proactive and get ahead of the game to make sure folks are protected. I think our state does land somewhere in the middle there. That's my reflection, but I think that's a great question for us to ask ourselves as leaders in our state. So I thought that was a very helpful framework.
Absolutely. I also wanted to weigh in. Thank you, Yasmin. I always love hearing from you, and I'm so appreciative of all the work that's going on at the National Skills Coalition. It's always an amazing time to come down to the summit and to connect with you all, to hear from people who are actively working on policies and on the Hill, and then to go as a group and speak with our representatives as a cross-sectional team. So I'm looking forward to being there in February, and I'm hoping that some of the other people on this call will be there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. And please reach out if you ever have a question or want to learn more, and if there's anything that we can do to be helpful.
Thanks, Yasmin. And Kristen, don't stop your
Okay.
sharing, because I want you to close us out in a way, but also really it's we're pushing forward as much as we're closing out together here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to say that I'm really thankful and excited about all the people that showed up today, Dan. I know that we put out an all call, but you never know who's going to respond. And to see this diverse group that are coming together to respond, it really makes me feel hopeful in this time of uncertainty and everything. But to see a group like this that's demonstrating commitment to that hope, and that they're ready for some hard work, I'm hopeful at least that's what we're hearing out there. We are in this time right now, right, of of coalition building, of teamwork. We've heard people talking about this multiple times already in this webinar, and we know that it's more important than ever. In order to be strong, in order to have those successful outcomes for the people of Connecticut, we really do need our partners to be strong. I liked what Yasmin said about basic needs is workforce needs. Like that there's real truth and power in statements like that. And this group gathered today, we all have different areas of expertise. We all have different passions and skill sets. We all have different connections. We all have different things that we're allowed to do from the seats that we sit in and from the funders that support us. Yet we're all working for the same outcome, a Connecticut where individuals are safe, where they can work hard and afford to feed and house their families, a Connecticut where companies invest in their communities and our kids see themselves employed in careers with opportunities, a Connecticut where our neighbors have access to support services so that when they hit a road bump, it doesn't become a future block. And while there is a lot to be done, and none of us in our organizations can do it alone, so we do need to lean in on each other, and we do need to lift up each other's work. We need to dovetail, support, amplify, whatever the word is that calls to your heart. It's not a time to isolate or to let unpredictability become immobility. The workers of Connecticut need us working in collaboration and not duplication in order to create a robust community where we are sharing information, supporting each other's initiatives, and relying on each other as true partners, not just in name, but true partners in the work of elevating Connecticut's workforce. Some of us are going to come to this table with the lens of youth, some with the lens of housing, some with the lens of industry pipelines and workforce development, and others with concerns about childcare, transportation, food, other things. But it is through these multiple lenses that we will be able to build a shared understanding and strengthen our impact. So I'm excited about the work that we have ahead of us in this upcoming year. I know that the campaign for a working Connecticut is going to really use our three core strategies of education, so getting policy information to the public, bill tracking, legislative intel. We're gonna use legislative engagement. We're gonna be inviting public testimony and lobby days and public awareness, whether that's op-eds or email blasts or webinars or social media. We're open to ideas, and we're hoping that we're going to get a flood of ideas coming from everyone here today, as well as people who were not able to join us. And while as a coalition, we want to hear about all of everybody's priorities and their initiatives, we are going to start with a couple core priorities, which are essentially protecting our workforce and investing in our workforce. And we have some ideas about what that can look like. When we're thinking about protecting our workforce, we want to talk about things like SNAP, like healthcare, like immigration, AmeriCorps, adult education. And when we're talking about investing in workforce, we're talking about maybe funding opportunity youth, the Connecticut Child Tax Credit, Early Child Endowment Fund, fiscal controls, and tax policy. But really, we're going for a coalition here. So we're inviting all of you to join us in this important work. And we are inviting you to help us build that coalition that represents all of us, the people we serve, and the state that we love. So we're going to have monthly meetings where we'll be doing all these things, and we'll be brainstorming and creating this together. These meetings are going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have it down as the last Wednesday of every month from 9:30 to 10:30. So I think the first one is January 28th. But I'm sure we'll get
I
information
may have
about
messed
it.
that up, Kristen. I'll send it out correctly.
Okay, did I get that wrong? Oh, we put
I
on,
don't know.
oh, I didn't even read the slide. All right, I was reading off my own notes. All right, so one of us is right and one of us is wrong, or maybe neither of us, but
Cheryl
we are
can fact
going to
check us.
have
I
a
know she
meeting.
can.
We're going to have a meeting. We're looking forward to having all of you there because you're going to have the great ideas. So I don't know if there's something else that you wanted to add to all of that, Dan.
I want to add, I'm pretty sure I'm the one who's wrong for their official record. Yeah, last Wednesday of every month. So don't look at that anymore. In fact, you don't even need to. No, I just wanted to add, I mean, I appreciate everybody for coming, and I really it was helpful for me definitely to get an update from Yasmin on all the different things going on. But as we kind of close out, and I do want to suggest that if folks want to stay in the loop, you're not signing up to do any enormous task. It's not like Yasmin said so well, right? There's going to be a whole ladder of opportunities, but if you are sort of generally aligned with this idea that we could have a workforce that's inclusive and is able to create that mobility we want to see in our communities, then get on the list so that we can keep you in the circle. But I'd also be curious as we kind of close out, and this is just a really easy thing to drop in the chat, as we think about meeting every month, what are some topics that you want to be further briefed on, right? Like today we took the federal topic because I think that's the ground that we really need to take into awareness. So much of our state work next year is in response to what's happened federally. But what else do you want to know more about, or perhaps what are some priorities you're working on that you could even be part of presenting to the broader group? Because I think that knowledge is power bit is going to make a big difference as we try to be intersectional together, right? So I at United Way would love to stand up for something that you are fighting hard for, and that's the type of web or net that works that I think is going to help us this legislative session. So yeah, I actually immediately thought of yours, Dan. Yeah, the whole volunteer engagement, work requirements, that whole topic would be a really interesting one for us to uncover. What else? What else is sort of on your either that you could help kind of bring forward as a priority your organization's working on, or you wish you could learn more about because it's important to your community? I'm going to add one. Yeah, the private sector to help, to kind of step up. As last year our state created a pretty innovative early childhood education endowment. There's actually a lot to continue to learn and unpack as we want to make sure that continues and strengthens and is becomes a permanent fixture in how we create opportunities for workers with families and children. But there's a lot to talk about there. So I'd love to bring that forward. In particular, yeah, the guardrails, fiscal controls, that's a connected question concerning the early childhood endowment. I'm fond of saying that our state has a full rainy day fund and is running billions of dollars in surpluses every year, but it's not entirely sure that's not going to be a permanent condition necessarily, and that's going to impact things like the fiscal controls, like the early childhood endowment, ESOL programming. Oh, Kathleen, you put a very detailed one in. Aligned post-secondary workforce pathways. That's a great idea. So just know, again, as we sort of build this table together, if there's something you see and you want to bring forward, Cheryl will be, messaging out to everybody and making sure we've got that going for that meeting, which is in the fourth Wednesday in January, and then every fourth Wednesday moving forward. So get on that sign up link. We will circle back with the slides and as well as the recording from today, but really just grateful you made the time. It is not a quiet time of year, not for advocacy and not for our personal lives. So appreciate you all for taking the time, and I hope to see you at the end of the month in 2026.
And Daniel, if I might, as we're closing out too,
yeah, please.
I think it's really clear that we all know that there's a lot of partnership work going on by a number of people in the state, and we're really looking at how do we build the continued efforts around a number of initiatives already occurring. And I think a lot of what Campaign for Working Connecticut is a number of organizations cannot necessarily advocate in the way that the Campaign for Working Connecticut can advocate. So I think having, as you mentioned, Daniel, right now we're in a place where indeed there is a lot of major challenges that are impacting the workforce, community. And I think we want to really assure that that sees itself as a advocacy priority. So I think looking forward to the work ahead, and part of having this meeting now in December was really to try to be timely in terms of being ready as we go into the new year. So thank you, Daniel, for letting me.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Krista. Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Yasmin. We'll drop that link in the chat again right there, and we'll send it out in a message to everybody as well. So thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks for all your hard work in advance.
Thank you.